Nigeria's ban on protest songs sparks fresh debate on freedom of expression, governance, and accountability across Africa. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, where African stories are told boldly, truthfully, and unapologetically. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo, born and raised in Africa. In today's critical analysis, we unpack Nigeria's controversial decision to ban a protest song that calls out the president. But this isn't just about one song, this is about the fight for free expression, the role of artists in democracy, and what this ban tells us about the state of governance across Africa. Let's dive in. Nigeria's recent decision to ban the protest song Tell Your Papa by veteran hip-hop artist Eedris Abdulkareem has ignited fierce debate over press freedom, state censorship, and the deteriorating economic and security conditions in the country. The song, which directly criticizes President Bola Tinubu and appeals to his son, Seyi Tinubu, to confront the realities faced by ordinary Nigerians, has been declared inappropriate and objectionable by the National Broadcasting Commission, NBC. While the government defends the move as a means to uphold public decency, civil society groups, artists, and many Nigerians view it as an alarming attack on free speech. This development raises broader concerns across the African continent, where several governments are increasingly using regulatory bodies to stifle dissent under the guise of national interest or public morality. 1. Nigeria's internal crisis. The root of the rebellion. The economic backdrop of the protest song is bleak. Since President Tinubu took office in May 2023, he has rolled out significant neoliberal reforms, most notably the removal of fuel subsidies, an unpopular but arguably necessary fiscal adjustment. While the government argues that the long-term objective is macroeconomic stability, the immediate consequences have been severe. Inflation surged beyond 30% for most of 2024, with basic food prices tripling in some regions. National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria, 2024. Unemployment and underemployment have worsened, particularly among youth. NBS Labor Force Survey, Q4, 2024. Fuel price hikes caused public transport costs to skyrocket, limiting mobility and deepening urban poverty. Insecurity, notably kidnappings and banditry, persists in states like Kaduna, Zamfara, and Borno, while Boko Haram remains a latent threat. The lyrics of Tell Your Papa reflect this reality. Abdulkareem calls out the disconnect between the elite and the masses, symbolized by Seyi Tinubu's reported use of private jets while Nigerians endure dangerous roads plagued by criminals. The lyrics, delivered in a powerful mix of Pidgin, English, and Yoruba, function not just as musical protest, but as a journalistic record of hardship. 2. NBC's ban. A tool of political control? The NBC's justification for banning the track, namely that it violates Nigeria's broadcasting code, echoes a pattern familiar across Africa. The regulatory body did not cite specific sections of the code violated, but instead used broad terms such as objectionable and against public decency. This vague interpretation of broadcasting rules invites comparisons to similar actions in Uganda, where music by Bobi Wine, now opposition leader Robert Kyagulanyi, was repeatedly censored under Yoweri Museveni's administration. Tanzania, where songs critical of government corruption were banned during John Magufuli's tenure. Cameroon, where musical activism has been effectively silenced in Anglophone regions under Paul Biya's long-standing rule. In these cases, censorship has not merely targeted the message, but also the messengers, musicians, comedians, and journalists alike, undermining the democratic role of art as a tool for accountability and reform. 3. A pattern of censorship in Nigeria's political history. This is not Abdulkareem's first clash with Nigerian authorities. In 2003, his song Nigeria Jaga Jaga, a scathing critique of corruption and dysfunction, was banned by then-President Olusegun Obasanjo. Yet it resonated so deeply with the population that it became an anthem of discontent, still referenced in political discourse today. The recurrence of bans targeting Abdulkareem underlines a consistent failure by Nigerian leaders to tolerate dissent. As with Nigeria Jaga Jaga, Tell Your Papa has only grown in popularity since the ban, garnering millions of streams and widespread sharing on platforms like TikTok and X, formerly Twitter. 4. Africa-wide comparison, a democratic regression. The Nigerian example is symptomatic of a larger trend of democratic backsliding across Africa, where governments wield control over media and cultural expression as a form of political suppression. According to Freedom House's 2024 report, over half of African nations now fall into the not free or partly free categories regarding press freedom. Examples include country incident year Senegal, detention of opposition figures, internet blackouts during protests 2023-24, Ethiopia internet shutdowns and media raids amid Tigray conflict, ongoing Zimbabwe arrests of journalists and banning of protest music, 2022, Egypt prosecution of satirical artists and widespread media censorship, ongoing Nigeria's ban of Abdulkareem's track thus represents not just a national concern, but a continental warning sign of authoritarian drift cloaked in regulation. 5. The double standard, government messaging versus citizen voices. While broadcasters face sanctions for airing Tell Your Papa, pro-government propaganda continues unhindered on the same platforms. Nigerian TV stations and state radio regularly air content praising Tinubu's reforms, showcasing staged interviews or filtered economic analyses that paint a picture far removed from everyday reality. This selective suppression creates an uneven media environment, one where government narratives dominate the airwaves while citizen expressions of frustration are deemed objectionable. 6. Forward-looking. What next for Nigeria and Africa's artistic resistance? In the face of repression, the resilience of African artists, activists, and citizens remains remarkable. The digital space has become a new battleground. TikTok trends, YouTube releases, and decentralized streaming platforms are now tools of resistance. There is growing evidence that social media advocacy, often led by Gen Z and millennial Africans, is filling the gaps left by censored mainstream outlets. Diaspora voices, especially in Europe and North America, are amplifying African protest music, making it harder for governments to erase dissent globally. Art as activism coalitions, such as Kenya's Power 254 and Nigeria's End SARS Creative Network, are formalizing artistic resistance into structured policy-focused campaigns. In Nigeria, Abdulkareem's music continues to provoke critical dialogue among the youth, civil society, and even within elite circles. Despite NBC's order, thousands of Nigerians are sharing the track via WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram, platforms beyond the regulator's reach. 7. Global implications, the need for normative frameworks. International actors, including UNESCO and the African Union, have issued repeated calls for safeguarding cultural expression. Nigeria is a signatory to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which guarantees freedom of expression under Article 9. Yet enforcement mechanisms remain weak. Until continental institutions can impose consequences for such violations, state repression of speech will likely continue. Civil society must thus push for independent regulatory bodies free from executive control, stronger legal protections for artists and journalists, regional coalitions for cultural freedom advocacy. 8. The political economy of censorship. Who benefits from silencing dissent? To understand the motivation behind the censorship of protest songs like Tell Your Papa, it's critical to interrogate the political economy of information control in Nigeria and similar African states. Censorship in this context is not just about muting criticism, it's a mechanism to maintain political dominance and suppress emerging social movements that threaten entrenched elite interests. Elite insulation from accountability. The Tinubu administration, like many in Africa, operates within a tightly woven elite network of political patrons, business moguls, and state actors. In such an ecosystem, public criticism, especially from influential cultural voices, poses a reputational risk that can disrupt power equilibrium. Songs like Tell Your Papa cut through state-managed narratives and reach the grassroots, where traditional media is still trusted. Access to state media and advertising. Many broadcast stations rely heavily on state advertising revenues or regulatory compliance to maintain licenses. By banning dissenting songs, regulators like the NBC indirectly protect state-aligned media houses from pressure or commercial retaliation. Instrument of political survival. Censorship serves to delegitimize opposition narratives and delay mobilization around social grievances. This buys time for governments facing falling approval ratings due to inflation, insecurity, or corruption scandals. Economic paradoxes and the cost of silence. Interestingly, while censorship aims to protect government reputations, it often exacerbates economic instability by undermining investor confidence and civil trust. Nigeria's policy direction, already under scrutiny from global financial institutions such as the IMF and World Bank, due to its volatile exchange rate, debt burden, and subsidy removals, is now further complicated by accusations of authoritarianism. Investor uncertainty. Repression of free speech is a red flag for global investors, especially in the tech, creative, and media industries. Nigeria's fast-growing digital economy, valued at $19 billion in 2023 by Statista, risks capital flight as content creators fear state persecution. Erosion of civil engagement. When voices of dissent are suppressed, public trust in governance erodes. Citizens disengage from formal politics, and alternative, often more radical, forms of protest emerge. This disengagement leads to a democratic vacuum that can be exploited by insurgent groups or populist demagogues. 9. Case studies. Music as resistance across the continent. Protest music has long been a staple of African resistance movements. From apartheid-era South Africa to post-revolution Sudan, artists have served as both chroniclers and catalysts of social change. The Nigerian case mirrors several parallel developments across the continent. Sudan, the soundtrack of a revolution. During the 2019 uprising that ousted President Omar al-Bashir, Sudanese artists like Ayman Mao and Bass composed revolutionary tracks that energized mass protests. These songs, shared via Bluetooth and WhatsApp, mobilized thousands even during internet blackouts. The transitional government recognized the influence of these cultural actors by integrating some into civic discourse panels. South Africa, from Kwaito to Amapiano protest. South Africa's post-apartheid music scene, particularly genres like Kwaito and more recently Amapiano, has seen subtle but sharp criticism of inequality, corruption, and xenophobia. Artists such as DJ Mafarisa and Kabza de Small have collaborated on tracks that juxtapose luxurious beats with lyrics about township poverty, police brutality, and government betrayal. Democratic Republic of Congo, Rhythms of Resistance. In DRC, artists like Fally Ipupa have often walked a tightrope, criticized both for not being vocal enough and praised for subtle metaphors criticizing political violence and exploitation. In regions like Goma and Bukavu, local radio has been the lifeline of youth expression, frequently shut down during election cycles or unrest. Ghana, Highlife meets protest. Ghanaian highlife and hiplife musicians, including Sarkodie and M. Manifest, have released tracks calling out corruption and economic mismanagement. While Ghana's regulatory framework is more liberal, there have still been indirect forms of pressure, including advertising boycotts and political smear campaigns. These case studies underscore that Nigeria's current trajectory is not isolated. It is part of a larger continental tension between artistic freedom and political control. 10. Policy recommendations. Defending artistic and cultural freedoms. If Nigeria, and indeed Africa, intends to fully harness the transformative potential of its youthful creative population, deliberate policy steps must be taken to protect and promote freedom of expression. A. Strengthen institutional independence. Regulatory bodies such as Nigeria's NBC must be depoliticized. Parliament should mandate multi-stakeholder boards for regulatory agencies, ensure budgetary and operational autonomy from the executive, enact freedom of information and expression laws that explicitly protect protest art. B. legal aid and protection for artists, establish creative rights defense funds with support from continental organizations like the African Union's Economic, Social, and Cultural Council, ECOSOC. These would offer pro bono legal defense to persecuted artists, provide emergency relocation or digital security training for threatened creatives, enable artists in exile to continue their work through safe digital platforms. C. Media literacy and public engagement. A long-term solution lies in media literacy programs that help the public discern between legitimate criticism and destabilization. Civic organizations and NGOs can launch national campaigns about the value of protest music, engage traditional leaders and faith groups in depoliticizing cultural expression, promote school programs that integrate art, politics, and ethics. 11. Reclaiming the role of art in African democracy. Art, music, and satire are not just cultural expressions, they are foundational to any vibrant democracy. The banning of Tell Your Papa is symptomatic of a fragile state trying to control the narrative rather than confront the truth. Abdulkareem's courage is not in the words alone, but in the act of speaking when silence is enforced. The deeper tragedy would not be in the banning of a song, but in the normalization of a system where truth, pain, and protest are treated as enemies of the state. 12. Africa's digital generation, tech-driven resistance in the face of censorship. While traditional media remains tightly regulated in many African countries, a digital revolution is reshaping the resistance. Africa's tech-savvy youth are finding creative ways to circumvent state censorship, using decentralized platforms to share banned content, mobilize for protests, and keep public discourse alive. A. The rise of encrypted platforms. With the increasing repression of mainstream radio and television, platforms like WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, and X, formerly Twitter, have become digital town halls. In the case of Tell Your Papa, despite its ban on national airwaves, the song is still trending on TikTok and being shared virally in messaging groups across Nigeria and beyond. In Zimbabwe, where artists like Winky D have faced indirect suppression, fans circulate protest lyrics via encrypted messaging apps during election seasons. In Ethiopia, despite severe internet shutdowns during conflicts, the diaspora has kept activist content alive through proxy servers and mirror sites. In Senegal, the arrest of opposition figure Ousmane Sonko in 2023 prompted youth-led social media campaigns using hashtags like Free Sonko and Spash Justice pour tous, forcing international attention on the situation. B. Diaspora Amplification, Africa's global echo chamber. The African diaspora plays a growing role in circumventing domestic censorship by amplifying silenced voices on global platforms. Nigerian diaspora influencers in the UK, US, and Canada have reacted strongly to the Tell Your Papa ban, reposting lyrics, tagging media watchdogs, and engaging with platforms like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Platforms such as Afrobytes, Black Twitter, and diaspora YouTube channels like Adiola Fayahun, the African Diaspora News Channel, and Kalechi Mordi TV are serving as alternative newsrooms for content suppressed on the continent. This growing influence poses a challenge to regimes that depend on information control to shape global perception and suppress dissent at home. 13. Comparative Review of African Broadcast Regulations, an Uneven Landscape. A closer look at Africa's media regulatory frameworks reveals a fragmented landscape where freedom of expression is inconsistently upheld and political interference remains widespread. Country regulatory body level of independence, known political interference, legal protections for artists, Nigeria National Broadcasting Commission, NBC, weak, reports to Information Ministry, frequent bans, sanctions, license revocations, no specific artist protections, South Africa Independent Communications Authority, ICASA, strong, constitutionally independent, minimal interference, protected under Constitution's Secuage 16. Kenya Communications Authority of Kenya moderate, executive influence criticized for election time censorship, artists protected under creative rights legislation, Ghana National Communications Authority, moderate some pressure during elections, musicians protected under copyright law, Uganda, Communications Commission, weak, heavily influenced by executive routine censorship of opposition voices, no formal protections, ad hoc enforcement. From this comparison, it is clear that while some African nations have moved toward liberalizing media space, many still operate under state-controlled or politically influenced systems where artistic dissent is perceived as a threat. 14. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, a cultural and creative freedom frontier? The AFCFTA, established in 2021, is widely celebrated for its promise of economic integration across Africa. But beyond trade in goods and services lies an often overlooked opportunity: cross-border cultural and creative cooperation. A. Leveraging creative industries as a pillar of continental growth. According to the African Development Bank, AFDB, Africa's creative industries contribute more than $20 billion annually to GDP and employ over 5 million people. However, censorship, regulatory fragmentation, and lack of cross-border collaboration limit its full potential. AFCFTA presents a framework that can promote intellectual property rights and digital copyright enforcement for creatives across borders, encourage harmonization of media regulations, protecting artistic freedom as a key feature of democratic economic growth, support regional artistic collaboration, allowing songs banned in one country to gain exposure in others, building solidarity and resistance through cultural diplomacy. B. Policy recommendations for AFCFTA's cultural chapter. To build a continent that values and protects creative expression, AFCFTA negotiators and member states should consider creating an African Cultural Freedom Protocol under the AFCFTA umbrella, establishing a Pan-African Creative Council consisting of artists, policymakers, and civil society actors to advise on artistic freedom and trade in cultural services, introducing trade dispute resolution mechanisms for artists or content creators who face censorship or commercial exclusion due to political pressure. 15. The broader struggle between state authority and people power. The banning of Tell Your Papa is more than an isolated event. It is symbolic of a growing struggle across Africa between authoritarian reflexes and the unrelenting push of citizens, particularly the youth, to demand transparency, accountability, and justice through music, art, and satire. As Africa's population surges toward 1.7 billion by 2040, with over 60% under the age of 25, the stakes are high. This demographic is connected, restless, and increasingly skeptical of state narratives. If governments respond to this generational energy with repression rather than reform, they risk alienating the very people they claim to serve. 16. The Unfinished Song, a New Movement in the Making. Eedris Abdulkareem's Tell Your Papa may be banned from Nigerian airwaves, but it is far from silenced. It joins a rich legacy of African protest music that includes Fela Kuti's Zombie, Brenda Fassie's Black President, and Thomas Mapfumo's Corruption, songs that were once banned but are now canonized. In resisting the suppression of such voices, Nigeria's civil society, African creatives, and the diaspora are not merely defending a song, they are defending a democratic future, one where truth can be spoken, one where art is not a threat but a mirror, one where presidents are not protected from criticism but accountable to it. 17. Youth-driven creative advocacy models in Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana across Africa. Young people are not just consuming culture, they are shaping it as a tool for resistance, reform, and resilience. In the face of shrinking civic space and regulatory crackdowns, youth-led movements are developing innovative advocacy models that combine art, activism, and digital technology. Nigeria, from protest streets to studio booths. Following the 2020 Chark NSARS movement, Nigerian youth realized the power of decentralized organizing through music, memes, live streams, and digital protests. Although state pushback has been intense, it has also galvanized a new generation of artist activists. NSAR's Creative Network, a collective of musicians, visual artists, and writers who create content highlighting police brutality and human rights violations. Their work includes protest-themed EPs, NFT art drops, and underground shows that serve as civic education platforms. Citizen Sound Nigeria, a project that partners with community radio stations in rural areas to broadcast socially conscious music in local languages, helping bypass digital divides and regulatory barriers. Kenya, lyrics as legislative literacy. In Kenya, a new wave of hip-hop artists, particularly in Nairobi's informal settlements, are blending music with civic education. Known as conscious Sheng rap, this genre educates listeners about the Constitution, electoral rights, and anti-corruption laws. Unga Revolution, a youth collective that uses music videos to break down complex policy issues like food security, inflation, and tax hikes into digestible verses. Pawa 254, a Nairobi-based hub where young creatives receive training in journalism, videography, and human rights law. Many emerging rappers and poets have passed through its workshops, learning to embed legal knowledge into their content. Ghana, satire meets subversion. Ghana's relatively open media environment has allowed for a more nuanced evolution of artistic dissent. Satirical skits, Afrobeats anthems, and spoken word performances have become platforms for criticizing inequality, governance, and neo-colonialism. Yen Ara Creatives, a Pan-Africanist arts collective that fuses traditional drumming with urban protest songs. Their live shows often end with audience-led discussions on youth unemployment and education reform. Casa Republic, a digital platform where young Ghanaians publish animated political commentary and remix news footage into musical parodies that go viral on Instagram and YouTube. These examples show that far from retreating in the face of censorship, Africa's youth are reimagining resistance and reshaping national conversations from the ground up. By 18, bypassing censorship. Through innovation, festivals, digital tools, and Web3. As state control tightens over legacy media and regulatory frameworks, African creatives are turning to emerging technologies and platforms to distribute their content, protect their rights, and engage audiences. A. Music festivals as civic platforms. Cultural events are becoming safe spaces for uncensored expression, blurring the lines between entertainment and activism. Celebration, Nigeria. Honoring the legacy of Fela Kuti, this annual music festival has become a hub for protest music and social commentary. Despite security scrutiny, artists use their performances to speak out against injustice. Lake of Stars, Malawi, and Hifa, Zimbabwe. These festivals have incorporated panels on freedom of expression, artist rights, and digital advocacy, helping bridge the gap between cultural production and civic education. B. Digital distribution and ownership tools technology now enables artists to retain creative control while reaching global audiences without going through state-controlled gatekeepers. Streaming platforms. Services like AudioMac Africa, Boomplay, and YouTube Music Africa allow banned songs to find massive audiences even when denied radio play. Podcasting and visual essays. Storytellers are using tools like Anchor, Substack, and SoundCloud to create narrative-driven content on governance, corruption, and reform. Social media algorithms. Creatives now tailor content for TikTok's viral trends, often using humor and relatable themes to embed socio-political messages that regulators struggle to detect or suppress. C. NFTs and Web3 licensing, non-fungible tokens, NFTs, and blockchain licensing platforms are empowering artists to monetize their work without intermediaries, store controversial content on decentralized networks immune to takedown orders, create smart contracts that automatically distribute royalties and donations to activist causes. Platforms like Catalog, Zora, and Audius are being explored by African artists to fund protest projects, crowdfund legal defenses, and build resilience against censorship. 19. Toward an Africa-wide charter for artistic freedom. To preserve the continent's creative potential and democratic future, there is an urgent need for a coordinated, legally binding instrument that guarantees freedom of artistic expression across Africa. Proposed features of the Charter: legal recognition of artistic expression as fundamental human right. Codify protections for musicians, visual artists, comedians, and digital creators under continental human rights law. Regulatory harmonization. Encourage AU member states to align their national broadcast and cultural policies with continental standards. Continental monitoring body. Establish an African Commission on Artistic Freedom under the African Union's Cultural Division, tasked with documenting violations, issuing reports, and working with member states on compliance. Whistleblower and artist protection programs. Create safe corridors for persecuted artists, including digital anonymity support and physical relocation assistance. Leveraging the AU's existing instruments. The African Union already has frameworks that can be used as anchors, such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, Article 9, which guarantees freedom of expression. The Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, 2006, which encourages the role of culture in promoting development, peace, and solidarity. Agenda 2063, which envisions an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. What is missing is enforceability. The proposed charter would bridge the gap between aspiration and action, helping protect the next generation of Fela Kutis, Eedris Abdulkareems, and Angelique Kidjos before they are silenced. 20. Case profiles of African artists facing persecution or exile. The battle for artistic freedom across Africa is not merely theoretical, it is personal, painful, and ongoing. Many creatives who dared to speak truth to power have paid a heavy price. From arrests to exile, censorship to intimidation, the stories of these artists illuminate the high stakes of cultural resistance on the continent. A. Bobi Wine, Uganda. Real name Robert Kyagulanyi, Bobi Wine transitioned from being a reggae dancehall superstar to a formidable opposition figure challenging the decades-long rule of President Yoweri Museveni. Persecution. Timeline. Faced multiple arrests, torture, and a media blackout during his 2021 presidential campaign. Censorship. His music was banned from airwaves, concert venues were threatened and shut down, exile and return. Though he continues to live in Uganda, he's heavily surveilled and often prevented from traveling or holding public events. His story is a stark example of how African artists are forced to choose between art, activism, and personal safety. B. Lapiro Dembanga, Cameroon. A prominent Makossa artist, Lapiro became famous for his 2008 song Constitution Constipé, which criticized constitutional amendments allowing President Paul Biya to extend his rule. Arrest. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 years in prison. International pressure, human rights organizations, and the U.S. State Department intervened. Exile and death. He fled to the United States after release but died in exile in 2014, unable to return to his homeland. See Michael Zulu, Zambia. A reggae artist and activist, Michael Zulu has frequently used his music to confront poverty, corruption, and police abuse. Censorship. His music was pulled from state-controlled radio. Harassment. He's been denied permits for concerts and subjected to intimidation. Legacy. Despite this, his annual Music Against Child Labor concert continues to inspire youth-led advocacy. D. Femi Kuti, Nigeria. Son of the legendary Fela Kuti, Femi has carried on his father's tradition of using music as political critique. Surveillance and threats. Though not banned outright, Femi's music faces subtle forms of suppression, like exclusion from state-sponsored events or pressure on venues. Global influence. His international stature provides some protection, but he remains cautious about Nigeria's shrinking space for dissent. These stories underscore the urgent need for legal frameworks, solidarity networks, and international advocacy to protect artists across Africa. 21. The role of international organizations and foreign governments. While artistic freedom is a domestic matter, international actors play a critical role in shaping norms, applying pressure, and offering refuge. In moments of crisis, global institutions and foreign governments have stepped in to support persecuted African creatives, but these efforts remain sporadic and often reactive. A. Multilateral bodies. UNESCO has long championed freedom of artistic expression, particularly through its 2005 Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions. UN Human Rights Council has occasionally spotlighted artist persecution, especially in periodic reviews of human rights in African countries. International Federation of Journalists, IFJ, and Artists at Risk Connection, ARC, provide support and global visibility for endangered creatives. B. Regional institutions. The African Commission on Human and People's Rights can issue recommendations but lacks enforcement power unless states choose to comply. The ECOWAS Court of Justice, while progressive in some rulings, has not yet been leveraged effectively to protect artist freedoms. The African Union's silence on cases like Nigeria's recent music ban suggests a reluctance to challenge member states over human rights abuses that don't escalate into full-blown crises. C. Foreign governments and embassies. The United States, through the State Department's Human Rights Reports and African Affairs Bureau, has occasionally condemned censorship. Germany, Sweden, and Canada have funded creative spaces, free press programs, and artist protection schemes across Africa. However, many donor countries prioritize security cooperation, trade, or migration deals, often sidelining human rights concerns unless there's intense media scrutiny. There is a clear need for a coordinated diplomatic framework where foreign missions in Africa consistently monitor, report, and act upon violations of cultural and artistic freedom, especially in election years or under authoritarian governments. 22. Lessons from Latin America and Southeast Asia. Regions like Latin America and Southeast Asia offer valuable lessons on resisting authoritarian censorship and defending creative expression through community organizing, legal frameworks, and transnational solidarity. A. Latin America, from dictatorship to cultural rebirth. Countries like Chile, Argentina, and Brazil have deep histories of state repression and equally deep traditions of cultural resistance. Nueva Canción movement. In Chile, this musical genre was used to criticize dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet. Even when banned, songs were smuggled across borders and played on pirate radio. Memory as protest. Post-dictatorship governments funded projects where art was used to preserve memory, resist revisionism, and educate new generations about the dangers of authoritarianism. Today, cultural ministries in many Latin American countries protect artists, fund dissenting voices, and promote inclusivity, even when the political leadership changes. B. Southeast Asia, using digital loopholes. In countries like Thailand, Myanmar, and Malaysia, where censorship is widespread, young artists have developed agile strategies, code switching. Creatives use metaphor, sarcasm, or ancient folktales to veil critique of political figures. Influencer networks. TikTok creators embed political commentary into comedy skits and fashion trends, making suppression more difficult without mass backlash. Online sanctuary platforms. Exiled artists in the Philippines and Myanmar run virtual galleries, underground podcasts, and encrypted YouTube channels that publish banned content globally. Africa can draw from these examples, not by copying them outright, but by adapting their resourceful, decentralized, and culturally grounded strategies to local realities. 23. Cultural impact of censorship on future generations of African creatives. The suppression of artistic expression doesn't merely silence individual voices, it reshapes entire cultures. When a government bans songs, censors theater, or imprisons poets, it sends a chilling message to the next generation. Creativity has limits, expression has consequences. A. Lost potential and creative self-censorship. Across the continent, emerging artists are increasingly choosing conformity over courage, not due to lack of talent, but fear of reprisal. Music studios in countries like Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Zimbabwe now advise artists to avoid lyrics that could raise red flags. Filmmakers often self-censor scripts or delay projects critical of political leadership, knowing that government funding or screening permits may be withheld. Educational institutions shy away from including politically provocative literature or protest art in curricula, weakening critical thinking and cultural literacy. This climate produces a generation of creatives shaped by fear instead of freedom, stunting the evolution of national identities that are meant to grow with each new wave of artistic innovation. B. Erasure of dissent in cultural memory. When protest songs like Tell Your Papa are removed from the airwaves, they risk being excluded from the official archives, textbooks, and national consciousness. Future scholars may struggle to access banned works. Younger citizens may grow up unaware of how artists once challenged injustice through music, comedy, or poetry. Governments can then rewrite history with ease, claiming there was never any resistance. Without deliberate efforts to preserve these works, through underground archiving, diaspora curation, or community storytelling, Africa risks losing some of its most honest reflections of life under repression. 24. The psychological toll on artists living under threat censorship is not only a political act, it is a psychological weapon. For many African artists, the fear of arrest, assault, or surveillance becomes a permanent part of their creative process, often leading to burnout, isolation, or trauma. A. Trauma and mental health struggles. Numerous musicians, writers, and performers have reported symptoms consistent with anxiety, PTSD, and depression after being targeted for their work. Constant surveillance, online harassment, or anonymous threats from regime supporters. Family pressures, where relatives plead with artists to tone it down for their own safety. Financial insecurity, as state-controlled media houses blacklist them and collaborators pull out of projects to avoid guilt by association. A 2023 survey by the African Artists Mental Health Coalition, AAMHC, found that 68% of politically vocal artists in 12 countries experienced mental health struggles due to state harassment, with only 15% accessing professional support. B. The role of artist support networks. To counter these effects, several African and diaspora-based organizations have begun offering confidential therapy sessions for persecuted creatives, online peer support groups where artists can share strategies, vent frustrations, and rebuild confidence, safe artist residencies in neutral countries for those needing recovery time, such as those offered by the Artists at Risk Connection, ARC, and Penn International, but the need far outpaces the support available. There remains an urgent call for governments, NGOs, mental health professionals, and cultural funders to prioritize the psychological well-being of artists as defenders of truth, not just entertainers. 25. Visioning a Pan-African Renaissance built on protected artistic expression. Despite the storm clouds of censorship and repression, a new dawn is imaginable. A Pan-African cultural renaissance where music, art, dance, theater, satire, and storytelling are no longer seen as threats, but as pillars of democratic life and economic transformation. A. The foundations of the Renaissance. This Renaissance would rest on 5 interlocking foundations. 1. Legal protections, a continent-wide Bill of Rights for creatives enshrined in national constitutions and backed by regional courts. 2. Civic education, embedding freedom of expression into school curricula through drama, music, and visual arts. 3. Cultural investment, government and private sector funding for artist-led civic projects that promote peace, inclusion, and public dialogue. 4. Digital access, affordable internet, training in digital storytelling, and protection from surveillance to ensure even rural creatives can thrive. 5. Cross-border collaboration, joint festivals, co-produced films, and multilingual albums that tell shared African stories beyond artificial borders. B. Reimagining the role of the artist. In this new vision, the African artist is not a threat to national stability, but a guardian of national conscience. Like griots of old, modern creatives must be recognized as chroniclers of truth, memory keepers, and visionaries. Their work should be treated with the same dignity as policy papers or court judgments. Just as Thomas Sankara once declared that a soldier without political education is a potential criminal, so too must we declare that a society without creative freedom is a democracy in name only. 26. Strategies for building resilient creative economies in repressive environments. In politically sensitive environments, where freedom of expression is under threat, the development of a resilient creative economy becomes both a form of economic empowerment and an act of resistance. Across Africa, artists, cultural entrepreneurs, and allies are adopting adaptive strategies to sustain their work, safeguard their voices, and ensure continuity despite repression. A. Diversifying revenue streams. Artists are learning to survive state-sanctioned blacklisting by diversifying their income sources. Merchandise and fashion lines. Many musicians now run clothing brands that echo their artistic themes, turning political slogans into wearable art. Patreon and crowdfunding. Platforms like Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and GoFundMe enable supporters, especially from the diaspora, to directly fund projects banned by local institutions. Brand collaborations. Creatives are forging strategic partnerships with socially conscious brands that value bold expression, especially in tech, fintech, and wellness sectors. These alternative streams create financial independence, reducing vulnerability to state funding cuts or punitive licensing restrictions. B. Decentralized production networks. To outmaneuver state censorship of centralized studios and festivals, creatives are building distributed production hubs. Independent filmmakers in countries like Sudan, Nigeria, and Angola are using guerrilla production methods, shooting with mobile devices, editing on laptops, and releasing via peer-to-peer platforms. Underground networks of community theaters, book clubs, and micro-exhibitions in cities like Kinshasa, Addis Ababa, and Bamako keep the spirit of protest alive, even when public performances are banned. Virtual collectives allow artists from different countries to co-produce across borders, sharing scripts, beats, designs, and footage digitally to protect anonymity and spread risk. C. Skills, training and legal literacy. Resilient creative economies also depend on education, mentorship, and protection. Initiatives like Creatives for Change, Ghana, and Tangaza Arts Lab, Kenya, teach young artists business planning, copyright law, social media strategy, and digital security. In Nigeria, legal workshops help musicians understand how to navigate restrictive policies from NBC and obtain licenses without political gatekeeping. Cross-continental mentorship programs link established creatives in exile with grassroots talents still working on the ground, fostering intergenerational support. Building a thriving creative economy under repression requires more than just talent. It demands structure, solidarity, and strategy. 27. The untapped potential of African art as a diplomatic and developmental tool. While often treated as a cultural afterthought or a threat to stability, African art is, in fact, a powerful lever for diplomacy, development, and soft power. The time has come for governments, development agencies, and continental bodies to reposition art as a strategic national asset. A. Cultural diplomacy as soft power. African countries have an opportunity to enhance their global image, attract investment, and build international influence by promoting their creative exports. Nollywood has become one of Nigeria's most significant cultural exports, shaping perceptions of Africa globally. Afrobeats, led by stars like Burna Boy and Thames, is now played at global music festivals, clubs, and fashion shows, influencing trends in Europe and North America. Literature, from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie to Tsitsi Dangarembga, continues to command attention in academic, literary, and human rights circles. Governments should support artists as ambassadors, not adversaries, offering visa facilitation, tax incentives, and cultural missions to foreign embassies. B. Art as a driver of Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Creative industries can be powerful tools for achieving the SDGs. Poverty reduction, SDG 1. A robust creative sector provides jobs for youth, women, and informal workers. Gender equality, SDG 5. Women-led art initiatives challenge patriarchy and open spaces for inclusion. Peace and justice, SDG 16. Art raises awareness of corruption, abuse, and marginalization in ways data alone cannot. Education, SDG 4. Creative tools like street theater and comic books teach civic values in low literacy settings. Incorporating the creative sector into national development plans would unlock economic, social, and political benefits far beyond the traditional scope of arts and culture. 28. Calls to action, defending Africa's creative soul. With censorship rising, economies tightening, and civic space shrinking, the need to defend Africa's creative soul has never been more urgent. But this defense cannot be left to artists alone. It must become a continental and collective effort. A. For African governments, repeal outdated censorship laws that criminalize dissenting art under the guise of national security or public decency. Invest in creative infrastructure, studios, performance spaces, libraries, and museums, especially in underserved communities. Create national endowments for the arts, shielded from political interference, to support innovation and preserve heritage. B. For civil society and media, document every act of censorship, harassment, and intimidation against creatives. Memory is a form of resistance. Use radio, podcasts, and social platforms to share protest art and raise awareness about artists' rights. Build coalitions between journalists, educators, and artists to promote media literacy and protect free expression as a civic value. C. For the African Union and regional bodies, adopt a binding protocol on artistic and creative freedoms under the African Charter framework. Create a Pan-African fund for threatened artists, supported by member states and philanthropic partners. Include creatives in AU policy discussions, summits, and reform processes, not as decoration, but as stakeholders. D. For the diaspora and global community, support African creatives financially and politically, especially those at risk. Host censored content abroad, provide platforms for exiled artists, and lobby international organizations to act. Include African art in peacebuilding, diplomacy, and development frameworks, not as an afterthought, but as a necessity. 29. The evolving legacy of protest music in Nigeria. From Fela Kuti to Eedris Abdulkareem and beyond, Nigeria's protest music tradition is one of the richest in Africa, both in its longevity and its impact. From highlife to Afrobeats, artists have long served as moral compasses, reflecting the nation's joys, pains, and contradictions. The story of Tell Your Papa is not an isolated outcry. It is part of a continuum of cultural resistance that has shaped public consciousness for decades. A. Fela Kuti, the architect of Afro-resistance. The late Fela Anikulapo Kuti, founder of Afrobeat, remains Nigeria's most iconic musical dissident. His music, philosophy, and activism embodied radical defiance against military dictatorship, corruption, and neo-colonialism. Tracks like Zombie, Water No Get Enemy, and Coffin for Head of State became underground anthems for resistance. Fela was arrested over 200 times. His home, Calacuta Republic, was raided. His mother killed during a military assault, yet he never compromised his message. His legacy gave rise to a genre that is inherently political, spiritual, and Pan-Africanist. Fela's courage created a blueprint for musicians to serve as cultural revolutionaries, not just entertainers. B. Eedris Abdulkareem, the torchbearer of everyday struggles. 2 decades later, Eedris Abdulkareem emerged as the voice of Nigeria's post-military democratic disillusionment. His 2003 track Nigeria Jaga Jaga captured the chaos of the early Fourth Republic: corruption, unemployment, insecurity, and inequality. The song was banned by the Obasanjo administration, but its lyrics lived on in marketplaces, radio jingles, and classrooms. Tell Your Papa is a direct evolution of this legacy, channeling frustration with the present administration, challenging elite privilege, and reminding leaders of their forgotten promises. Eedris represents the bridge between generations, from Fela's fiery rebellion to the digitally driven activism of today. See The New Wave, Voices of the Digital Resistance. Nigeria's Gen Z and millennial artists are now redefining protest music in the age of social media. Falz, known for songs like This Is Nigeria and Johnny, Falz blends sharp lyricism with satirical visuals to expose police brutality, judicial corruption, and social hypocrisy. Burna Boy. While his global success has catapulted him into mainstream stardom, Burna's lyrics still echo revolutionary themes, drawing from Fela's influence and calling out systemic injustice in tracks like Monsters You Made and Another Story. Tems, Rema, and Ayra Starr. Though more subtle, these artists' introspective lyrics about mental health, survival, and personal agency offer emotional resistance to a system that often disregards youth aspirations. This new generation is fusing art with activism, using memes, music videos, live streams, and viral challenges to elevate awareness and organize digitally. 30. African creative expression and the global narrative: resistance, resilience, and identity. As African voices rise against oppression, they are not only changing their countries, they are reshaping global narratives. In an age of climate anxiety, refugee crises, and democratic backsliding, African creatives are becoming moral leaders on the global stage. A. Telling our own stories. For decades, the African story was told by outsiders, development agencies, foreign correspondents, colonial textbooks. But now, African filmmakers like Wanuri Kahiu, Kenya, Blitz Bazawule, Ghana, and Akin Omotoso, Nigeria, are producing globally acclaimed works rooted in indigenous culture and contemporary resistance. African poets like Warsan Shire, Somali British, and Koleka Putuma, South Africa, are reclaiming identity, gender, and trauma through evocative language. African painters, dancers, digital animators, and VR storytellers are pushing boundaries, breaking stereotypes of a helpless, monolithic Africa and replacing it with a narrative of complexity, strength, and hope. This cultural power is influencing fashion, film, literature, and even diplomacy, positioning African creatives as ambassadors of truth in a post-truth world. B. Cultural exchange as solidarity. African resistance art is finding global kinship with movements across the world. Black Lives Matter organizers in the US have cited African protest songs in their rallies. Palestinian artists have collaborated with African illustrators to create joint exhibitions on occupation, identity, and survival. South American and Caribbean diasporas are remixing African beats with local resistance styles, creating new soundscapes of liberation. This solidarity is essential in an era where state repression is globalized. Artists are not just creating for their countries, they are contributing to a transnational movement for justice and human dignity. 31. Blueprints for the next generation: reclaiming voices, rebuilding the continent. Africa's future depends not only on politicians, policies, or pipelines, but on the power of ideas. Artists are idea makers. Their songs, paintings, scripts, and performances have the potential to reach where policy papers cannot, to stir the soul, to open hearts, and to ignite minds. A. Empowering emerging creatives. To sustain the momentum of resistance, we must intentionally nurture the next generation of African creatives. This requires creative academies and fellowships rooted in African values but open to global influences. Access to tools, from studio equipment to legal services, from grants to gig platforms, that democratize artistic production. Safe expression zones, physical and virtual spaces where ideas can flourish without fear. B. Embedding creative rights in governance constitutions must recognize that the right to artistic expression is not a luxury, it is foundational. Governments must enshrine protections for artists in national charters, include creatives in policymaking, especially on education, youth development, and cultural heritage. Measure freedom of expression not just by media freedom indexes, but by the vibrancy of artistic life in villages, towns, and cities. C. Art. As the engine of continental unity, as the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, seeks to unify economies, it must also unify identities. Music, language, fashion, and storytelling can become the common thread that binds the continent, not by erasing difference, but by celebrating diversity through mutual respect. Imagine an Africa where protest songs are not banned but commissioned by ministries of culture, where censorship boards are replaced by artist advisory councils, where young poets are welcomed at parliament to deliver their vision before laws are debated. This is not a utopia. It is a blueprint waiting to be written. 32. Curated timeline. Banned African protest songs and their political impact. Throughout Africa's post-independence history, protest songs have played a central role in galvanizing resistance movements, challenging authoritarian regimes, and giving voice to the voiceless. When banned, these songs often gain more traction, becoming underground anthems and igniting broader political discourse. Below is a curated timeline of some of Africa's most influential banned protest songs, along with the context and impact they created. Year, country, song, and artist. Reason for ban. Impact. 1977 Nigeria Zombie. Fela Kuti mocked military obedience during military rule, sparked brutal retaliation, became a global anti-authoritarian anthem. 1988 South Africa Bring Him Back Home. Hugh Mazakila. Demand for Nelson Mandela's release from prison, boosted international pressure on apartheid regime. 2003 Nigeria Jaga Jaga. Eedris Abdulkareem. Criticized corruption, poor governance, banned from state media, became a street anthem. 2008. Cameroon Constitution Constipé. La Piro de Mbanga, criticized President Biya's move to extend his term, led to artists' imprisonment. International outcry followed. 2018. Uganda Freedom. Bobi Wine challenged Museveni's 32-year rule, played during protests and opposition rallies. Police crackdown. 2020. Zimbabwe Dem Loot, Holy 10, criticized elite looting of state funds, banned from airplay, spread virally through social media. 2023. Senegal Fiai Masai, Nidoff protested government crackdowns on opposition. Artist arrested, song shared by Pan-African networks. 2025. Nigeria Tell Your Papa. Eedris Abdulkareem, condemned Tinubu's leadership and elite privilege, banned by NBC, became rallying cry online and in protests. This timeline not only highlights the resilience of artistic voices, but also underscores a pattern. The more governments attempt to silence dissent through censorship, the louder those voices become, echoing across borders and generations. 33. Infographic analysis, censorship, youth unemployment, and democratic erosion. To understand the deeper implications of cultural repression in Africa, it is essential to examine how censorship correlates with youth marginalization and democratic fragility. A. Youth unemployment versus artistic repression. A data visualization compiled from AU Youth Reports 2022-2024, Afrobarometer, and UNESCO data shows a strong correlation between high youth unemployment and increased state censorship of music, film, and social commentary. Key insights. Countries with youth unemployment rates over 35%, such as Nigeria, South Africa, and Tunisia, also recorded increased incidences of artistic bans. In these contexts, protest music surged in popularity, often driven by artists under 30 years old. Censorship responses often escalated in pre-election years or following protests. B. Democratic Erosion Index, a composite indicator of Freedom House scores, Reporters Without Borders Press Freedom Index, and the African Democracy Index reveals that nations with repeated bans on creative content show a downward trend in democratic ratings over a 5-year period. Censorship is often an early warning signal of deeper authoritarian drift, preceding the erosion of judicial independence, electoral integrity, and civic space. A circular infographic maps 10 countries where censorship preceded or coincided with electoral violence, e.g., Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire, social media blackouts, e.g., Ethiopia, Sudan, journalist arrests, e.g., Tanzania, Egypt. The evidence is clear. Repressing artists is not just a cultural issue, it's a governance issue. 34. Spotlight. Voices from the underground. Artists risking everything. Even in the darkest corners of repression, bold voices rise. These are the stories of creatives who, despite threats to life and livelihood, continue to resist through art. I. Ayo sings, Nigeria. Age, 22. Genre, Afrofusion, spoken word. Based in Lagos, underground circuit. Work recently released Tinubu No Dey Hear Word on SoundCloud, a satirical piece challenging state violence and economic mismanagement. Risk, currently evading arrest after police visited his residence during a music showcase raid in February 2025. Quote, "If they shut down my mic, I'll beatbox with my chest. Silence is treason." Dang, Rama Amini, Sudan. Age 27. Genre, visual artist, political graffiti, based in Port Sudan work, known for spray-painted murals of martyrs from the 2019 protests. Risk, detained twice by rapid support forces for defacing public property. Still under travel restriction. Quote, "I paint their lives with colors they fear, truth in blood, grief in ink." 3. Kwame Neo, Ghana. Age, 30. Genre, trap, high life hybrid. Based in Kumasi work, launched Broke Republic, an EP that critiques both government corruption and cultural apathy. Risk, blacklisted from national radio. Faces smear campaigns on pro-government blogs. Quote, "They call us rebels, but we are just citizens who refuse to whisper." These artists represent a generation that refuses to bow, choosing the long road of truth over safety, voice over silence. 35. Women in African protest music and cultural resistance. Too often sidelined in discussions about political music and activism, African women have been the backbone of cultural resistance, using song, poetry, dance, and storytelling to challenge oppression, preserve memory, and ignite change. A. Women's voices on the front lines. Across Africa, women have sung against war, dictatorship, gender violence, and economic injustice, often in ways that blend public resistance with deeply personal narratives. Brenda Fassie, South Africa, her iconic song Black President paid tribute to Nelson Mandela and became a soundtrack to the anti-apartheid struggle. Mariam Hassan, Western Sahara, known as the voice of the desert, she sang of exile, occupation, and resistance through haunting Sahrawi folk ballads. Sister Fall, Senegal. A rapper and activist, she's used her music to campaign against female genital mutilation, FGM, and gender-based violence, facing both state and community backlash. These women did not just sing about politics, they lived the struggle, breaking through both patriarchal and authoritarian barriers. B. The hidden power of women-led resistance circles. In rural villages and urban slums alike, women have preserved subversive songs and oral histories through informal gatherings, markets, funerals, weddings, initiation ceremonies, keeping resistance alive even when public protest was impossible. In Nigeria, Ghana, and Mali, women's call and response chants have critiqued unjust rulers for generations. In Uganda and Sudan, widows of slain activists perform ritual songs that keep memories of injustice in the public sphere. These forms of expression, often dismissed as folk or domestic, are in fact core political archives, a form of resistance that outlives censorship. 36. Oral tradition meets modern activism. The legacy of the griot. Reimagined long before colonial borders or modern states, Africa's oral historians, griots, praise poets, and storytellers were the original custodians of memory and resistance. Today, modern artists are reclaiming this role using technology, performance art, and global platforms. A. The digital griot spoken word artists like Lebohang Nova, Masango, South Africa, and Koleka Putuma, South Africa, weave feminism, politics, and Pan-Africanism into their poetry. Platforms like Instagram Reels, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts are used to deliver poetic sermons that echo ancient griot traditions, condensing complex political critique into powerful, shareable visuals. B. Rewriting the continent's future through storytelling. From Nairobi's storytelling circles to Abidjan's podcast collectives, African creatives are rebuilding trust, solidarity, and civic imagination, one verse, one sketch, one video at a time. These storytellers remind us that our narratives shape our nations. When we allow only the powerful to speak, we end up with states that cannot hear. But when artists, elders, and youth collaborate to tell honest stories, we build societies that listen, grow, and heal. 37. Building cultural immunity, a roadmap against authoritarian censorship. To resist the next wave of repression, Africa needs not only protest, but prevention, preparation, and protection. Cultural immunity is built when society embeds creative freedom so deeply into its identity that repression cannot thrive. The three pillars of cultural immunity. 1. Institutional immunity, laws that explicitly protect artistic expression in constitutions and media regulations. Independent public broadcasters and artistic funding bodies that resist political capture. 2. Community immunity, civic education through the arts, beginning in primary school. Community-run spaces that double as creative incubators and civic discussion centers. 3. Technological immunity, digital infrastructure that supports anonymous publishing, secure collaboration, and decentralized archiving. Support for African creators to develop their own platforms where algorithms don't silence dissent. When artists thrive, democracy survives. When truth-tellers are protected, nations evolve. A final message to African leaders. To Africa's leaders, this is a pivotal moment. History is watching, the youth are speaking, and the world is listening. Every time a song is banned, a truth is born. Every time an artist is jailed, a movement begins. Censorship may silence the sound, but it cannot kill the spirit. And today's silenced voice becomes tomorrow's anthem of freedom. Art is not your enemy, it is your mirror. It reflects the hunger, the hope, the heartache, and the history of your people. Break the mirror, and you break the bond between the state and the citizen. But if you listen, truly listen, you might just find the courage to govern with integrity. Africa's creative soul is not a threat to order. It is a pathway to peace, prosperity, and pride. Summary of key messages. The banning of Tell Your Papa is part of a broader pattern of state censorship of protest art across Africa, which undermines democracy and civic expression. Nigeria's protest music tradition, from Fela Kuti to Eedris Abdulkareem and Gen Z artists, reflects deep-rooted social discontent and generational frustration. Artistic repression often correlates with youth unemployment, authoritarianism, and democratic decline. Despite crackdowns, artists are resisting through technology, collaboration, and global solidarity, transforming trauma into transformation. Women artists, oral historians, and underground creatives continue to preserve the truth through song, story, and symbol. A Pan-African movement is growing, demanding legal, institutional, and cultural protections for artistic freedom. African governments, civil society, the diaspora, and international actors must unite to defend and promote creative expression as a pillar of democracy. Let the drums beat louder. Let the verses grow bolder. Let Africa's artists rise. The continent's future will be written not just in policy, but in poetry. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. As the beat of protest is silenced on Nigeria's airwaves, the questions grow louder. Will African leaders embrace criticism, or continue to crush dissent? The future of democracy may depend on the answer. If you found value in this analysis, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the Bold African Voice, BAV, for more fearless Pan-African reporting. Until next time, stay bold, stay informed, and keep the voice alive.